Okay, we'll do. All right, so welcome everyone. Any lingering questions from the On Being podcast last week? A lot of it's that stuff it is going to start, some of it will start to be familiar because you're hearing it a couple of times, the same ideas.
Yeah,
Okay.
I thought it was very interesting. I had never heard of Krista Tippett before.
She's very interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Worth following her. Um, let's see. So today I wanted to do sort of drill down on some of the brain science details, and then we'll take a bit more experiential look next week with some people who have other, also more sciencey approaches, but some more experiential things. Like there's the people from Cirque du Soleil have an awe piece on TED. I'll show you next week, which is good fun. Okay, so but this week, let's see. First, let's see. I think I was going to start you off with, what was it? Okay. Want to do, okay, so I want to start with the vagus nerve and which feeds into something that's called polyvagal theory. So I have two relatively short videos, different. This one is Docker, and the other one's someone else. But just to get you a little more detail on what's going on with that. They talked about that in the On Being podcast a little bit about how awe is going to help sort of quiet down the vagus nerve and how the vagus nerve is connected to all of these parts of your body. And anyway, so this is all the whole this larger field called polyvagal theory. My wife's a psychotherapist and she uses this in her work too. But it's been coming along the last decade or so, with people starting to understand more and more about how we are sort of deeply connected between brain and the rest of the body, including going down into the gut. Okay, so here's Docker explaining it.
Now, my lab and some other labs have become obsessed with this fascinating part of your body called the vagus nerve. Vagus is Latin for wandering, and the vagus nerve starts at the top of your spinal cord. And just think about a couple of things. It's unique to mammals, right? It is interconnected, some studies suggest, with oxytocin networks, which we're about to talk about. Recent studies suggest the vagus nerve is also related to a stronger immune system response. And very recent evidence in the last year or two suggests that the vagus nerve, as it wanders through the body, regulates your inflammation response to disease. This is one of the great mind-body nexuses in the human nervous system. The vagus nerve wanders through your body, starts right up here on the top of your spinal cord. It goes to muscles in your neck that help you nod your head and orient your gaze towards other people and vocalize. It then goes down and drops down and helps coordinate the interaction between your breathing and your heart rate. Every time you take a deep breath, right, your heart rate slows down. It's like baseball pitchers, 3 and 2 count. You don't see them go, right? They breathe out to calm down. The vagus nerve controls that relationship between those two patterns. Then it drops down into the spleen and liver and controls a lot of digestive processes. There used to be certain surgeries for digestive disorders that would sever the vagus nerve because it regulates digestive process. It's this amazing bundle of nerves. And given that it helps you communicate, it helps you empathize by orienting gaze, because it's connected up to oxytocin receptors, and because it's mammalian. A fellow named Steve Porges said, this is the love nerve in your body. It is the caretaking nerve in your body. What a fascinating possibility. So what we've been doing in our lab to assess that thesis is we show participants images of suffering and distress. And if you reflect on the image, you may even feel your chest sort of change a little. And then because this is Berkeley, we show them images that create an opposite state, which is pride. So we'll show our undergrads images of Berkeley, like Sather Gate. And this is what's amazing to me. Images of suffering activate the vagus nerve, right? We have a new study. If somebody tells you an experience of, say, their grandparent dying, your vagus nerve fires. If they tell you an inspiring story, their vagus nerve fires. It's getting ready for feelings of compassion. This graph just shows you when you measure vagus nerve by looking at the relationship between heart rate and breathing, we call RSA. The more I feel compassion, the stronger the vagus nerve response. The more I feel pride, the weaker the vagus nerve response. And this really astounds me. In that state of having a strong vagus nerve response, I feel common humanity with many different groups, right? I'm feeling connected to people of different political persuasions, different ethnic origins. These are Berkeley undergrads. They even admit to feeling similar to Stanford undergraduates, which is a remarkable thing. So, and that's the self-other similarity. So these deep ethical intuitions of, gee, we have common humanity, are tracking a physiological process, which is really, really cool. Another way that we can study the role of the vagus nerve in compassion and the meaningful life and social well-being is find people who have really strong vagus nerves or sort of high levels of activation in that bundle of nerves. You can do it in the lab. You could come to my lab and we could give you a profile of how, and we think of this as a temperament. I, as a joke, called these people vagal superstars, but that's how people like to think about them. And what we find is a really interesting profile. If you have a really sort of a strong vagal profile, which you can cultivate through exercise, and recent studies suggest meditation and other practices. If you have a strong profile, you have more positive emotion on a daily basis, stronger relationships with peers, better social support networks. Kids in schools, fifth graders who have a stronger vagal profile are the kids who intervene when a kid is being bullied, and they cooperate and will donate time, like recess time, to help a kid who needs help on homework. It relates to altruism and pro-sociality as well, and they're trusted more. So another kind of data that says, wow, we think of compassion as this higher order emotion, but it really is tracking part of our nervous system as well.
Okay. So actually here, I want to show you something my wife has in her office.
Jared, while you're doing that, out of the blue, a girl from grammar school emailed me and said how much she appreciated when I intervened when she was being bullied.
Oh,
No.
In fifth grade, you know, she had
wow.
she had curly red hair, and she often was the brunt of bullying. So
Oh,
after all those years, she remembered.
wow. That's remarkable. Yeah, beautiful story. And so many years later.
And I guess it's because I was born with a strong vagal nerve. Now I know.
Now you know. Now you know how this works.
Because I often wondered, why did I intervene? What prompted me to do that? I have no idea. I had no idea.
Yeah.
Now I do.
So she has this big poster. Let's see, how far back do I have to get to show you the whole poster? Really big poster that shows sort of how this vagus nerve is working. And you can see all of the, all of those connections, top of the head, the face, going down into the chest, down into the gut. So the
It sort of parallels our spine, huh?
well, yeah, although, but not following it because it's going down through your organ.
Right. It's parallel to.
So the poster here likes to emphasize these sort of different aspects of what it's affecting here: social engagement and play. What is that? Intimacy, whether we shut down or freeze or fight or flight. So it's and I'm not sure. I need to look at I think the color coding is coding which sort of part it's with. So like the green part is social engagement, and the red part down there towards the gut is going to relate to freeze or flight or fight. And then intimacy is sort of going from green to red, which is kind of interesting. So it's because of light wrapping around the heart. And yeah, anyway, so very, very complicated set of things going on in there. Okay.
Are there studies that show what happens if the vagal nerve is damaged?
Oh, that's a good question. There's got to be some, yeah, because he mentioned that they were doing it intentionally at some points.
Yeah. Actually, I think I can answer that.
Uh-huh.
So when somebody goes like, they have the spine in that area of their body loses contact with the rest of it, and they become paraplegic or hemiplegic.
Mm-hmm.
All of their emotions seem to be softer and muted.
Oh, interesting.
So it's about its intensity, especially
Yes.
later.
Yes, and it's not just the vagus, it's paraplegic or hemiplegic.
All kinds of things are cut, yeah. Well, that's really interesting. Okay, let's see. So the other one I have is, I think, a little bit more technical on how they use this idea clinically, if I'm remembering the right thing. Come on, there we go. All right, here we are.
Actually, our nervous system is functionally a triangle upside down. Okay, with a point. This is the brainstem. I'm talking about the circuits that are being regulated in the brainstem that regulate our underlying state, percolate information up to the brainstem, and the brainstem, it literally is transmitting that information to higher brain structures, enabling access to different brain areas, so that when we're in safe states, we can access higher cortical functions. But when we're in dangerous states, those systems turn off and we're defensive. If we think of this triangle, and each time we get higher and higher, we have greater diversity of expression and outcome. So I'm talking about basically 3 states that provide a neural platform for great diversity of expression. If you are in a constant dangerous environment, your nervous system is going to find it difficult to detect safety. So if it can't detect safety, it's going to be in the state of more fight, flight, a low threshold to react. And when you're in that state, you're going to misread other people's cues. So you're more likely to see neutral faces as being aggressive. You're more likely to see fearful faces as if they were angry. So you can really confound difficult relationships. So you won't be able to use people to self-regulate. They'll become threatening and reactive. So if you have a history in which there is no experiences of using people to regulate in a very pro-social positive way, people will then become threatening or damaging to you. And what I always want to emphasize is that the social interactional behavior is a neural exercise. It's a neural exercise of using newer mammalian structures, it's evolutionary newer structures, to inhibit very primitive defensive systems. So if we feel that we're in safe environments, we'll use our face, we'll use the intonation of our voice, and we'll negotiate a relationship or maintain safety by doing that. And this is what friends do. This is what lovers do. This is what supposedly teachers are supposed to do and therapists, right? If we're a little bit in a more dangerous situation, like a novel environment, we don't know anything about it, we'll go into another physiological state that will support fight or flight mobilization behaviors. And if we can fight or flee, get away from something, then we've actually negotiated that danger. But what if we can't get away from the danger? What if we're held down or we're in a confined environment? What if we're trapped in a car or a plane or in a bathroom and someone is now going to hurt us? The possibility is that we could trigger a third circuit, which shuts us down. And it's that shutdown circuit that makes it so important in understanding trauma. And the polyvagal theory articulates that shutdown circuit, while most other theoretical models of trauma and what people would call stress disorders only talk about a fight-flight system. Okay, so that's the core of what I would tell a person about the polyvagal theory. And the second component of that core is that these responses are not voluntary. Our nervous system is picking up information in the environment and evaluating that information, not on a cognitive level, but on a subconscious, we want to bring back that term, but on a neurobiological level, where we're picking up features of risk or danger. And our nervous system puts us into those different states. And we can become aware of that because when we're in certain environments, we may feel our heart pounding. And we may ask the question, why is my heart pounding? And then you'll say, well, something in the environment must have triggered it. But often we don't know the cues that trigger these things. So the point I want to make is first that the polyvagal theory provides us with an understanding of three neural circuits that support different types of behavior. One is social engagement behaviors in safe environments. The other is fight, flight, and mobilization behaviors. And the third one is really a shutting down, a second level of defense.
It's a shame so many women struggle to lose weight. When this special coffee loophole helped me drop from 184 to...
Oh, okay, that was it. Yeah, I thought.
Dr. Stephen Porges,
Okay. Hold on a second here. This, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I think it's hard for us as you know, sort of modern humans to think of ourselves as not controlling or not being able to control a lot of these things, that we sort of get this message that we're supposed to be in control, and in fact the body has its own reactions, and then that's going to feed into how you think. And I have an example of this phenomenon that most people are familiar with, and some of you may have heard me talk about this before, in terms of how fast the brain can respond to things. But if you think about it, if you've been on ice or snow and you lose control of the car for a second, or you're walking somewhere and you slip where you didn't expect to slip, and it can seem like all of a sudden time slows down. You know that phenomenon? Mm-hmm. And what's happened is that you're getting all of this information from the world about what's happening, and your brain takes sensory input and runs it through different brain circuits that are going to include what's going on with your gut, but it's also going to include some emotional circuits going through the amygdala, and then the hypothalamus, where it's going to check that experience with memory. Do I recognize what I'm experiencing? Do I recognize the feeling I'm having? And all of that, then your body will start to respond to. And so if it's something novel and dramatic that your body wants a lot of adrenaline, then it's going to pump you with adrenaline fast. And before you were really aware of what was happening, your brain and body have recognized that they need to do something, and this adrenaline has kicked in such that your brain speeds up a little bit, and so it seems like time slows down. But the adrenaline can help you be a little stronger and faster in some ways, but it's frustrating, right? That's how you notice the time slows down, is because even your body is not moving the way you want it to in that time frame. And all of that happens in fractions of a second prior to you being aware of you having an experience. And I just think that that's just an amazing, it's just an amazing phenomenon about how complex and how fast our bodies, these systems of our body can work and respond to the world. And so, now with the polyvagal theory, we're learning that now there's all sorts of layers to how your body is going to react to different kinds of emotions, and how that's going to feel in your body, and how those feelings then are affecting your emotional states. And anyway, I find the complexity of all of that very fascinating. And I think it's useful to keep in mind in the whole context of this, what we're trying to do here in terms of experiencing awe is the biggest picture of it would be, engineering that in your life. I think that taking yourself and putting yourself in a spot where you're going to experience awe, and all of that is a matter of letting your body just do what it naturally does, and you just putting yourself in a context where you can take advantage of that's what it does in that context. And so by understanding different contexts and how we react to different contexts, we can try and control a little bit all of those kinds of different feelings. And to me, it seems it's sort of like, a different variation on meditative practice. When you're meditating, you're trying to do the same thing, calming those systems, getting in touch with them. And the awe is just sort of a different thing you can do to affect all of those different systems in a way that has these really positive effects on your psychology. So I love it.
Perhaps unconsciously, but through the ages, we've been creating beautiful gardens, right?
Mhm.
I mean, even in the Middle Ages, the kings and people of money would create these amazing spaces.
Just so they could go and wander in them. Yeah.
And be awed by them.
Be awed by them. Yeah. Exactly.
And now we're awed by these beautiful gardens that were created.
I have a comment. I'd like to get back to that last speaker. I don't know who did you say was the last speaker that we
What
heard?
the heck is that guy's name? Stephen Borges.
Okay. What I heard him say is that your basic situation and your feeling of safety has a lot of influence on whether you react in a pro-social way, let's say, feeling connected, or you're going into a fight or flight response. And that made me think, we ignore a lot of that because so many people feel unsafe in today's environment. The media emphasize crime and all the things that are happening, wars. You'd think that people in the Middle Ages and before, had other things to worry about in terms of safety, and then we live relatively safe lives. But I think psychologically, many of us don't feel safe. But so, can we access those feelings of awe and pro-social, or what, like in this other Krista Tippett thing was called collective effervescence. I found that a very interesting term. Like that term. If we feel basically, unsettled and unsafe, and is it more like the lower levels that take over? I thought it was interesting that he basically was saying our lower brain stem is still involved to a large degree in how we ultimately react.
That context and feeling safe. To me, these are very powerful arguments for why society should be much more intentional about how it creates space for people.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking even schooling, think of kids that come from very unsafe environments, neighborhoods that have shootings all the time and so on. And then, here we try to, in schools and so on, promote pro-social behavior, group cohesion, and he's saying it's not the brain, it's not the intention for people to react differently in a stress response, in a fight response.
Yeah, yeah.
It's the basic condition isn't given, so a lot of thoughts about society, as you say.
Mhm.
I taught in the inner city in Chicago for my 10 years experience, and I found that the children were like relieved to be in the classroom
Mm.
because I think they felt that they were safe there. Yeah, as opposed to the world outside.
And it was predictable to some degree. They knew what to expect, and yeah.
Exactly, and how they would be treated. And I have a quick story of how scary it was for these children. So I was a new teacher, and you give kids jobs, they like to do that. So I had a tape recorder. You see how old I was. A tape recorder, and we were in mobile units, so it wasn't quite safe because people would break into the mobile units at night. Anyway, so I would have the kids carry my tape player to my car as one of the jobs. Looking back, that was really foolish. The kid came back all upset that somebody took the tape player from him as he was walking to my car. But get this was the more telling part. He said, at least they didn't take your car keys. And this was an 8-year-old boy.
Wow.
An 8-year-old boy that was relieved that the car keys weren't taken and just the tape player was taken. And my heart just poured out that this kid was aware of that danger.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to be aware of that. Yeah.
No, exactly. In fact, my body's reacting as I tell the story.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There you go. Biggest nerve.
Well, I think it's interesting because, part of the poly and polyvagal is that part of the vagus nerve has to do with safety and assessing safety in the environment, but another branch of it has to do with social connection. So I think that's interesting in terms of awe and that whole category of moral beauty, of why does moral beauty make us feel awe?
Interesting. Yeah. 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 That's the social, that's that social part that's connecting.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to me, what it really shows is just how deeply social we are, that all of these pro-social feelings and emotions are they're buried into our guts as well as into our higher brains. It's really remarkable that way. And I guess that makes sense that that it would be a mammalian thing, because it's mammals that are social in intentional ways. I mean, I don't think ants are really social in an intentional way. They requires emotional navigation, or bees. But people, get to mammals, and even probably rats being social with each other, or mice, that these features of our brain systems are useful for their being social, because it's social in a more complicated way, and then we, of course, in an even more complicated way. It's just really remarkable.
And then in terms of trauma, there's the question, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? But I think now people are also focusing on the question, do I matter? And if you think of how much human upset happens because you feel like you're being treated like you don't matter.
Yeah, which is another, I think, that deep part of being social. And I think some of you have heard me mention this, but I love my favorite example of this. So I have to tell it for the new people. The primatologist Franz de Waal, who Ducker has mentioned, from Atlanta, his lab did this amazing experiment. It's probably like 15 20 years ago now. They first did this. They took 2 capuchin monkeys, which are little monkeys from South America, and they teach them to do these tricks, and then and you reward them. And for the capuchin monkeys, grapes are like candy. So they put 2 monkeys in cages that are next to each other where they can see each other. And the experimenter has each of them do the little trick that they're supposed to do. And it gives one of them a grape, and it gives one of them a slice of cucumber, which is not candy. And the monkey that gets the cucumber will actually pound on the ground and even throw the cucumber back at the experimenter. It's clearly recognized, you are dissing me. What is going on here? The other one got a grape. I'm not getting a grape. You're dissing me. So it's just remarkable that level of being social, you can tease it out very viscerally, even just with these little capuchin monkeys, knowing that they're getting insulted by the experimenter. Oh, capuchin monkeys are good fun. All right, so I have another one here that's it moves a little slower, not quite as exciting. It's a little bit longer, but I think some of the details that he gets at are kind of interesting. This is also trying to get a little more of the science behind awe. So where did my sharing go? Do this one more time here. Oh, I was going to do the default mode network first. Okay, let's go back to that. Sorry, I did want to do that. So this is another thing you've been hearing about. This is I think in terms of the science that we're encountering, there are really two streams to it. One stream is this polyvagal thing that, okay, your brain and body and mind are all connected intimately, and how those feelings work is going to be very important based on what you're experiencing. The other kind of more abstract line of science is this thing called default mode network, which is the parts of your brain putting together your conscious experience of yourself going through time. And the basic thinking so far, and I think they're having a hard time figuring out how to really study this directly, but their suspicions are that that's a lot of work that your brain is doing to maintain that sense of self all the time. And so if you can do something where you just take all those systems offline for short periods of time, which seems to be even seconds at a time, up to minutes, but for short periods, if you stop that work, excuse me, some dogs barking. That if your brain stops doing that work, that somehow just not doing that work has these very positive effects on your moods. So anyway, so this is the other kind of big half of the science, default mode network.
Welcome back to another lesson. We're talking about the brain's default mode network in this lesson. So we're going to talk about where in the brain this default mode network is located. We'll also talk about important functions it performs, and we'll also talk about some different psychological problems that can occur if the default mode network isn't working properly. So the default mode network is a pattern of brain activation that occurs during a resting state. So it's different brain structures that activate together when we're in a resting state. And during states of focus or attention, the default mode network becomes deactivated. So this default mode network was actually originally found accidentally in other brain imaging studies where they had patients doing some cognitively stimulating activity. And then in between each of those activities, researchers noticed this pattern of brain activation that occurred during rest. So this is where we see the default mode network. Now, when the default mode network is activated, there are particular structures in the brain that become activated. That's that pattern of brain activation we talked about before. So when the default mode network is activated, these are the parts of the brain that are activated. More specifically, those locations include the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex, which is this location here in the frontal lobe of the brain, the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, which is this area of the frontal cortex, the inferior parietal lobes, which are on the inferior aspect of the parietal lobes, which is this lobe here of the brain, the temporoparietal junction, which is the junction between the temporal lobe and the parietal lobe, the posterior cingulate cortex, which if we were to split the brain in two and look between the two hemispheres, the posterior cingulate cortex is this area here. And then the hippocampus is also a part of the default mode network, which is not in the diagrams we've shown. So these particular structures in the brain that become activated occur bilaterally. They occur in both hemispheres. And it has been noted that the default mode network is more activated in particular age groups. So it's more activated in adulthood as compared to very young childhood and very old age. So the extremes of age seem to have lower activity of the default mode network. And these structures seem to be more highly associated and more interconnected with each other in female patients. So a couple of important and interesting notes to point out here.
At Amica, we know the most important part of the car is the driver.
Let's talk about the functions and the purposes of the default mode network. So one of the most important functions that this particular network does is mind wandering and daydreaming. So in those states where we're not actively doing something and we are at rest, where we let our mind wander or perform daydreams, this is when the default mode network is activated. Other important functions that this network performs is self-reflection and self-referential and introspective thoughts. So thinking about yourself, thinking about things that you've done or mistakes you've made, all of those are going to be important parts of this network as well. Processing of episodic memory is also an important function of the default mode network. So this is going to include recollecting past memories, so thinking about past memories or thinking about autobiographical memories, so especially autobiographical memories, so thinking about things that happened to you personally in the past. You're going to be utilizing your default mode network. This is going to be more likely to be active. Planning for the future is also another part of the default mode network. So what we would call prospective memory. So you're thinking about a possible future plan or future situation, you're utilizing the default mode network. And these two particular functions, the processing of episodic memory and planning for the future, are generally activities performed by the posterior cingulate cortex. We mentioned that as an important brain structure in the default mode network. Social awareness and cognition is also another important function of the default mode network. So when you're engaging with somebody in those times where you're not really thinking about the engagement itself, you might be thinking about how what they've said relates to you or relates to what they've said in the past. So all of that has to do with the default mode network as well. And kind of abstracting a general idea from what we've just mentioned, the default mode network seems to play an important role in integrating past information with the current situation you're in and also helping to plan for the future. So it's involved as a sort of function of interplay between what you've heard and what you know before and what you're experiencing now and what you're going to do in the future. So that all ties in with some of the processing of episodic memory, planning for the future, and social cognition. So if you know somebody, what they've said in the past, you can input that into the current situation you're engaging in. So all of that has to do with, again, integrating past information with your current situation for ability to plan for the future. And then it's also involved in utilization of schemas and narratives. Schemas are going to be these mental representations of parts of your environment or patterns of beliefs regarding your environment. And narratives are going to be stories that you have about particular situations. So again, it seems to play a role in integrating past, present, and future information. So it can be reminiscent of a story or a narrative, and it can also help edit particular narratives you might have. So if you have a particular story or narrative about a particular restaurant you go to, and then something changes at that restaurant, your default mode network engages with that new information and changes the narrative with regards to that restaurant. So that is one interesting aspect of this pattern of activation of the brain, how it can modify certain narratives or stories you might hold about certain situations. So that's a lot of information. It's maybe hard to
I want to pause on that for a second. Let me just go back to show it. My wife was telling me that people who develop dementia can often stop being depressed. So if someone had a problem with depression and then dementia sets on, suddenly the depression goes away. And when you hear this, it sounds like it's maybe not just memory that's at issue, but it's these default mode network functions that if you don't have those stories going on in your head to bother you anymore or make you anxious, then or you're not having a reaction to the story of yourself that was problematic because you've lost track of the story of yourself. So you can't have a problem with it anymore. And that just seems remarkable to me that could happen. Which it's a curiously positive effect of something that's really bad. The dichotomy of that is just really, really very curious to me. Anyway.
Narratives or stories you might hold about certain situations. So that's a lot of information. It's maybe hard to understand exactly what the default mode network is doing, but what we can take away here is that when the default mode network is deactivated or has lower activity, this is when the brain is engaging outwardly. We can think of it engaging outwardly. Perhaps you're doing some outward goal-directed behavior or action. So you're not really thinking about your future plan or a past memory, but now you're actively engaging in some process. This is when the default mode network is suppressed.
Right, and this is, you all recognize this, right? If you're busy working on something and you get very engaged with it and you sort of forget where you are and what time of day it is because you're just so engrossed in the thing that you're doing. I think that's an example of this phenomenon.
That's like the state of flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Or it's deactivated. Whereas the default mode network is activated when you're thinking inwardly. So inward or introspective thinking or planning. So this is the way you can sort of remember when the default mode network is either deactivated or activated. So the default mode network is deactivated when you're actively or cognitively engaged in some activity. You're not thinking about any past memories. You're not wandering in your thoughts. You're simply focused on that task. Whereas when you're at a resting state, you're not focused on any particular task. Your mind is wandering. You're thinking about the past. You're thinking about the future. That is when the default mode network is activated. So I hope that helps as a way to remember when it's activated and deactivated. Now let's talk about the default mode network and associations with psychopathology. Now, it has been found that default mode network activity is altered in patients with major depressive disorder. For instance, it has been found that there is higher default mode network activity found in patients who are more likely to ruminate. Ruminating is when you're thinking about something that bothers you, perhaps a past memory that is troubling you, and you're thinking about that over and over and over again. That's rumination, and that's more likely to occur if you have higher default mode network activity. It has also been found that individuals with higher neuroticism, this is one of the big 5 personality traits. So this is the trait that indicates high negative emotion. If someone has higher neuroticism, they are more likely to show higher levels of default mode network activation when hearing criticism as compared to patients with lower neuroticism. So in those patients, they hear criticism from somebody, some personal criticism, and they keep thinking about it over and over again. They keep ruminating on that criticism. So it's recollecting that past autobiographical memory over and over and over again. And that's, again, part of the default mode network. So we see higher levels of default mode network activation in those individuals. It's also been demonstrated that individuals with generalized anxiety disorder have dysfunctional default mode network activity as well. So we mentioned before that the default mode network is involved in thinking about the future. So in patients with generalized anxiety disorder, they may be thinking about the future, certain anxiety-provoking things that are bothering them with regards to their future. So in those patients, they may have higher default mode network activity because they're thinking about some future possibility that is causing them anxiety, for instance. And then it's also been noted that there is structural and functional issues in the default mode network in patients with autism spectrum disorder as well. So this makes sense. As mentioned before, the default mode network is involved in social awareness and social cognition. So remembering, being aware of what the person that you're interacting with now said to you before, and also what they're saying to you now, and putting that together and interacting with the person is all going to be important with regards to the default mode network. So this makes sense that we can see particular issues in autism spectrum disorder in the default mode network. Please check my lesson on brain language areas and check out my other lessons on other brain anatomy topics. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe for more lessons like this one. And as always, thanks so much for watching.
Okay.
Didn't catch that autism is the default mode high or low or not functioning as supposed to
Yeah,
be.
he just said it was dysfunction somehow, but I suspect what it means is it's lower.
That's what I was thinking. He didn't say, yeah.
Because I've heard that people with well, no, because you could, well, I mean, some people, I guess if the autism is of a certain sort, you just don't, if you're not noticing social cues, then you can't be anxious about them because you didn't notice.
That's true. That's true.
There's also the aspect of a more obsessive compulsive component, which is often found with ASD people, and that would mean, the mind is ruminating about.
The opposite.
Yeah, it would be saying the default network is activated more because I can't free myself of this thought.
Okay.
Obsessive thought.
So maybe it might go depending on the.
Well, you have all kinds of components.
Go either way.
It's overlapping and mixed, but I think it would probably mean some individuals with autism disorders have higher level of activation.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, this is also again, it's sort of fascinating brain science. What was I going to say? There does seem to be something, I mean, like the flow, right? There's something similar with the awe, but it occurs to me that when we talk about awe, those experiences tend to be much more fleeting, where that kind of experience of flow someone can get into and for an hour or two maybe, or depending on the personality, maybe too long, be in that state, and not keeping track of the world, and and everything's good because they're so busy doing what they enjoy doing. But the fact, so there seems to be something, there's something about awe that's relating to all of this, but is doing it faster and more powerfully than the ordinary situations like of flow where the default mode network is offline for a while. So, and I'm not, and I haven't heard yet, have yet to encounter someone who has a theory about what exactly is that difference, what might be going on in the brain that's going to account for that. And I guess it's just because the science is so new that they haven't really had a chance to tease that out so much yet. Okay. Well, let's see. Other stuff I have is going to take a little bit longer. Do I have something really quick I could show you? I have. Oh, well, there's one. I have one. I don't think we quite got to that fits with some of the earlier stuff that relates to beauty, which is kind of short. Let me see if I could. Well, make that happen here.
Internet from T-Mobile.
Okay.
15 bucks at T-Mobile.
That's happening.
Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with our series, Dumbfounding Definitions.
Oh no, this is the one we did see this one already. The definitions one, yeah. Okay. Why did I left my note about that in the wrong place? Okay, now I guess at this point I'm just going to I'll just let you all go a couple minutes early then, so rather than getting started on something that's going to take a little longer. So this would be a good time for concluding thoughts or questions.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I had an experience once where we were driving north on 10th Avenue on Capitol Hill, and all of a sudden, a car came from the left, not seeing my car, missed the stop sign, and smashed right into the left side of the car. And it was totally unexpected. I was, usually I feel like I'm in control of things. The experience of being totally out of control, it's like my life was now in the hands of a higher being as the car was pushed off to the side. And it was a low speed incident, so nothing horrible happened. I mean, the car was totaled, but we wound up on the right side curb after it all stopped. It was like I had taken a spaceship ride or something. I mean, it was just totally out of conscious. It was just it was sort of a fascinating experience to just be totally out of control. I had nothing to say at all about what was going to happen to me at that time. And all of the networks were offline.
Yeah.
Right, but it probably happened in slow motion too.
It felt like I was floating or drifting or, it was just, I've never experienced anything like that. And I mean, the bags popped open, and it was just totally unexpected, totally out of my experience. Fortunately,
and that happens insanely fast too. There's airbags deploying. Just one second they're there, and the next second when they're not, and then they're there. You just have no awareness of them even expanding because it happens.
Yeah, and I don't think I realized they had popped open until the car stopped.
Yeah. Wow.
And I could think about what just happened. It was just an unbelievable experience, and somehow that's related to what we've been talking about. I'm not sure exactly how, but
interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because usually you feel like you know what's going on, you're in control, and all of a sudden you're surprised that you're not in control.
Yeah, it's like, so in terms of default mode network, it's like it was totally taken offline. And
that surprise that's occurring to me with the awe, maybe that's part of what's more powerful about it than flow, is because awe can be a real surprise. You're not, even if you put yourself in a place where you expect it, you really can't predict your reaction to what's going to happen in your reaction to the awe, and so you're often surprised by it. And the most dramatic examples are like remember the guy with the rainbow, the double rainbow, just raving about the wonder of this beautiful experience, and because he just didn't expect it at all, just totally surprised by it being there right in front of him. So yeah, I bet surprise is a big factor in the power of that experience.
So I hate to be a know-it-all, but this used to be my field.
You do know some psychology.
Yes, I used to teach this before I retired. And for most emotions, there is a fast way of responding, and there's a slow way of responding. And this has been proven for anger and fear, not with other emotions, but maybe we can generalize, I'm not sure. So there's a very fast response that tends to go through our spinal column, and it triggers a lot of hormonal reactions, like the adrenaline that you were talking about. And then afterwards, the frontal lobe and other parts of the brain will come in and interpret what we saw. For example, we might be walking at night and we see something on the ground and we jump back before we know what it is. And afterwards, we figure, oh, that was a snake or that was a hose. But it takes a little while to get there. So for most of the very intense emotions, there's a fast and then there's a slow.
Interesting.
And what Bob seems to be talking about is the really fast one. And the slow one kind of like kicked in a little bit later.
This is what just happened to me. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
So one sounds visceral and the other one is reflective then, sort of.
The visceral is reflective. So that's the first one, the fast one, goes through the spinal cord and it affects the viscera. And then it gets to the brain, and our slow brain chugs along, particularly the frontal lobe.
Trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
So, like,
Yeah.
what just happened?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, that is interesting. Yeah. So I think that is even kind of better reason to think that if awe is acting as in the fast emotion version, that's going to be a kick its power up for us in terms of its effects.
And I think that has to do with the way we interpret awe. That is why people who are, for example, affiliated with a religious church will then say, what just happened to me was I saw angels,
Right.
or
right.
I was taken in by the Latifa, or some people will interpret this as being nature or whatever it is. We have the experience, and then we start putting little labels that say, oh, that's what happened.
Yeah.
And those come from our culture, our traditions.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right, people. It's been a good class. I love this. Yeah, this is also something teaching undergraduates you can't rely on. They know a little bit, so occasionally you'll mention something and say, "Oh, I just took a class on that." But this is what I love about teaching you all as a student population is you know stuff. You've lived life, and you have real expertise that you can bring to the classroom and share with us. So I that's part of what's fun about teaching this level of teaching. All
And
right.
I love hearing other people's stories.
Yeah. Okay. I'll see y'all next week.